Hello there. Welcome to Sleepumentary. Wind moves first. It hums low across the Mongolian Gobi, combing sand through the ribs of half-buried stones. There are no trees here, no shade, only the shimmer of heat and the rhythm of hooves as a lone herder guides his camels toward the horizon. The dunes seem eternal, older than memory itself, but beneath their surface lies another world, a buried past where this same desert once ran green with rivers, where giants walked beneath storms of summer rain. So, before we continue, if this tale keeps you company tonight, leave a like and subscribe. Only if it truly feels natural. And now, softly tell me, where are you listening from, and what hour has the night brought you? Today, the Nemegt Basin is one of Earth's most desolate landscapes, yet its silence hides an archive richer than any library, a fossil bed stretching across southern Mongolia that once pulsed with life 72 million years ago. In the language of geology, this place is called the Nemegt Formation, a monument not of stone temples or carved idols, but of bone sediments and the delicate imprints of vanished footsteps. Every bone unearthed here is a phrase, every trackway a sentence written in mud long before human eyes could read. When scientists kneel in this sand, they are in a sense reading water. The layered clays and sands around them, cross-bedded, rippled and sorted, tell of a time when this desert was a web of anna-branching rivers, channels that split, meandered and rejoined like veins beneath the skin of a living planet. Unlike the wandering snake of a single river, anna-branching systems weave through forests, creating islands and floodplains that breathe with the seasons. When rains came, these channels spilled over their banks, leaving behind silts and clays that would cradle fossils for eternity. When drought returned, they dried into hard flats, trapping the prints of those who came to drink before vanishing in the sun. To imagine this world, close your eyes. The year is somewhere near 72 million BC in the late Cretaceous. The air is warm, heavy with moisture and the fragrance of ferns. Giant dragonflies patrol above oxbow pools. Forest canopies shimmer with cicad conifers, and dawn redwoods, their roots gripping mud that never sleeps. Herds of hadrosaurs graze along water's edge and turtle shells gleam beneath slow-moving currents. Predators stalk the shadows between reeds. This is not the barren Mongolia we know. It is a land of abundance where rivers sing and every flood writes a new page in Earth's story. Paleontologists speak of deep time, a scale so vast that the rise and fall of civilizations vanish to a blink. But here deep time feels close, almost intimate. The bones that lie beneath these dunes once carried blood and heat. They belong to living beings that watched their skies, fought for survival and raised young along the same riverbanks that now lie under silence. The Nemegt Formation is their mausoleum, but also their diary. Each expedition that crosses this expanse, Polish, Mongolian, Japanese, American, adds a few more words to that diary. A femur protruding from a slope reveals where a herd may have crossed during a drought. A nest of fossilized eggs whispers of vanished care. Even the direction of pebbles in a layer can tell whether a flood arrived from the west or the north. In this way, scientists reconstruct not only species, but moments, flash floods, droughts, migrations, ambushes. It is history without witnesses, yet written with astonishing precision. The desert's paradox is this: it kills, but it preserves. What the gobe erases from the surface, it guards below. Wind scours away soft sediment to reveal what time meant, to conceal exposing skeletons bleached by the sun that once walked under clouds of steam and thunder. Some fossils here are so complete that skin impressions still cling to their flanks. Others are shattered, scattered by ancient scavengers and modern storms alike. Each discovery demands reverence not only for the animal, but for the improbable chain of accidents that allowed its story to endure. To walk among these dunes is to feel the Earth's pulse in slow motion. Beneath every step you tread over a buried delta, a river mouth frozen in stone. Somewhere below, a sauropod's ribcage arches like a collapsed cathedral. Nearby, the trackway of a hadrosaur drifts beneath layers of dust, its pattern faint but unmistakable. These are the syllables of the desert's long memory. And so the film's thesis begins to take shape: one landscape, many seasons, one fossil bed, countless lives. The Gobi is not simply an ancient graveyard, it is a time capsule of ecological rhythm. It tells us that environments are never static. They inhale and exhale through floods, fires, droughts and rebirths. What is now a wasteland was once a cradle of biodiversity, proof that even the most barren places were once sanctuaries of life. As twilight falls over the dunes, the wind rises again, whispering across the sand like the sound of distant water. For a moment, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The rustle of leaves, the echo of hooves in mud, the call of a creature whose bones now sleep beneath your feet. The desert remembers its rivers, and tonight it will tell their story. Bones, sediment, and a changing world. The bones of the Nemegt Formation do not lie at random, they rest in patterns carefully sorted by water time and chance. What seems to the eye like chaos is to the geologist choreography. Channels once braided across this land like the fingers of a giant hand, each one rising and falling with the pulse of the monsoon. When the rivers flooded, they ripped trees from their roots and swept carcasses miles downstream. When they ebbed, they left behind shallow pools, mudflats and sandbars where the dead could settle, waiting to be buried by the next breath of sediment. To stand before a fossil cliff here is to look at a cross-section of time itself. Bands of ochre, clay and sandstone alternate, like the pages of a long-lost manuscript, each layer marking a shift in environment. A coarse, gritty bed may speak of a violent flood. A fine-grained, pale clay hints at the quiet stillness of an overbank swamp. In between you might find a crevasse, splay the signature of a breached levee where water burst through, fanning out a sudden blanket of mud that sealed whatever it touched. Those quick floods were nature's archivists. They turned death into memory. When a dinosaur collapsed near a watercourse, its bones did not scatter immediately. Flesh clung long enough for the next silt pulse to entomb it. Over time, minerals replaced the bone cell by cell, preserving every ridge and socket until it hardened into stone. The Nemegt is filled with such miracles of timing moments when catastrophe became conservation. This paradox is what makes deserts such exquisite keepers of ancient life. Though they seem sterile now, they are built from sediments laid down by rivers and lakes long vanished. The dryness halts decay. Rain may be scarce, but when it does come, it exposes the buried etching out vertebrae and claws that catch the sun for the first time in 70 million years. Wind and sand act as sculptors, peeling back time grain by grain. Each expedition here doesn't so much find fossils as uncover what the desert has been revealing on its own, one storm at a time. But not every skeleton was laid to rest gently. Some were torn apart by the same forces that sought to preserve them. Scavengers picked through carcasses, bones rolled and broke in torrents, teeth shed by predators sank into the same sediments as their prey. Paleontologists call this process taphonomy, the science of decay, burial and resurrection through rock. It is forensic work stretched across epochs. In the Nemegt Formation, taphonomy tells as much story as the bones themselves. A Sauropods thigh bone bitten clean through bears the arc of serrated teeth that match a Tarbosaurus jaw. Nearby loose Tyrannosaur teeth scatter like dropped daggers in the mudstone. Each tooth is more than a weapon, is a timestamp proof that predator and prey once crossed paths along the same riverbank. By mapping where these clues occur, clusters of bones, bite marks, coprolites, tooth sheds, scientists can reconstruct scenes of pursuit, feeding or drought-driven congregation. Sometimes a site tells of sudden death, a whole herd mired in mud after a flash flood preserved mid-struggle. Other times it tells of slow attrition skeletons, weathered and scattered bones cracked by the heat of many suns before they were sich, wood finally entombed. To a paleontologist, these patterns are the grammar of the fossil record, verbs of violence, nouns of endurance, adjectives of erosion. What emerges from this grammar is not just a catalogue of species, but a portrait of a world in motion. Floodplains advanced and retreated like lungs breathing across millennia. Each shift in climate reshaped the stage. More sand meant wider channels, less rain meant longer droughts and harder survival. Over tens of thousands of years, the Nemegt ecosystem adapted herbivores following greener margins, predators evolving to match their strategies. The landscape became both battlefield and sanctuary, a place where adaptation was written directly into the bones. When modern researchers brush dust from a fossilized rib or trace the ripple marks in stone, they are decoding this choreography between water and life. Every groove carved by a current, every grain of sediment packed around a skeleton is evidence that this desert was once alive with movement and sound. The Gobi today is wind and silence. The Gobi then was thunder and flood hooves in mud and the calls of creatures we will never hear again. To understand those vanished worlds, we don't just study the fossils, we study the architecture of their burial. Because the ground remembers the way a body met the earth, the angle of its fall, the direction of the current that carried it. And through that quiet geometry we glimpse the ancient choreography of survival, death, and the rivers that turned both into eternity. Sauropods, the herd and the horn of voices. The Nemegt plain once trembled not under the feet of predators but under the march of thousands. Across the fertile margins of ancient rivers, a tide of life rolled forward Sauropods, the duck-billed titan of the Cretaceous floodplains. At more than 12 meters long and weighing up to 12 tons, it was a creature built for endurance rather than speed, its every step a soft percussion on the mud. When a herd of them moved, the earth did not echo, it resonated. Their bodies were masterpieces of adaptation. Muscular tails for balance, wide feet for soft ground, and powerful jaws lined with hundreds of self-sharpening teeth designed to grind the fibrous plants that grew in profusion along the riverbanks. This was a creature shaped not for battle, but for persistence, a grazer that fed from sunrise to dusk, transforming entire forests into fuel for life. But it was the head crest that made Sauropods unforgettable. Rising like a backward-pointing spike from its skull, this bony ornament wasn't mere decoration. To scientists, it is a mystery still whispered about in laboratories, part aesthetic, part acoustic. Some paleontologists believe the hollow crest, formed a natural resonating chamber, turning the animal's breath into deep haunting calls that could travel for miles across the floodplain. Imagine the scene at dawn, the first sunlight filtering through cicades and conifers, mist curling off the river. A herd of Sauropods lifts its heads and one male exhales a low, trumpeting note. Another answers from across the water, the sound swelling through the trees like the moan of a brass instrument played by the earth itself. These calls may have signaled identity, mating, readiness, or alarm. Perhaps they kept herds unified when monsoon storms blurred vision and scent. In a world crowded with predators, communication could mean the difference between life and extinction. Modern analogues lend weight to the theory. Just as cranes and elephants use low-frequency calls to stay in touch across distances, Sauropods may have filled the wetlands with a chorus inaudible to smaller creatures but thunderous to their kind. The desert rocks, when struck by wind, seemed to hum faintly as if still remembering those ancestral notes. The crest also served another purpose: display. Its shape, size, and possibly even coloration could have helped individuals advertise strength or maturity. Like modern reindeer antlers or peacock tails, the crest was an honest signal, costly to grow, impossible to fake. In the age of dinosaurs, beauty often doubled as survival. These herds lived by the rhythm of the rivers. When floodwaters swelled, they migrated to higher terraces where new vegetation sprouted in abundance. When drought set in, they followed the last green corridors, sometimes traveling dozens of kilometers to reach shrinking pools. Evidence from fossilized trackways hints at seasonal migration, the herd's footprints tracing ancient routes etched into the sediment. Young Sauropods likely stayed near the safety of adults, forming tight clusters for protection, while the elders scanned the horizon for danger. Predators like Tarbosaurus shadowed them, but even the most formidable hunter thought twice before charging into a phalanx of tails and hooves. A single adult could deliver a kick capable of breaking bone. The herd's defense was its unity, an instinct that endured from generation to generation. The fossil record here preserves not only bones, but behaviors. Entire bone beds have been uncovered, containing individuals of varying ages, suggesting mass gatherings or catastrophic events that struck whole herds at once. Perhaps a flash flood swept them away. Perhaps drought brought them to a single doomed waterhole. Whatever the cause, they died together as they had lived side by side. Their bones entangled in the sediment formed silent choirs beneath the Gobi dunes. In life, Sauropods was a bridge species connecting the vast herding culture of hadrosaurs across continents. Related species roamed what is now North America, showing that these Jawas giants crossed prehistoric land bridges linking Asia to the Western world. In death, they became the emblem of a vanished ecology, creatures that depended on abundance yet left their stories buried in desolation. Today, when wind passes through the eroded cliffs of the Nemegt, it sometimes whistles through cavities in the rock. Locals call it the singing desert. To a scientist's ear, it is only air. But to those who've heard the theory of the crest's voice chamber, the sound carries something older, an echo of communication across a prehistoric floodplain, a memory of a species that filled the world with resonant breath. In the great orchestra of the Cretaceous, Sauropods was not the loudest nor the fiercest, but perhaps the most harmonious, a creature that thrived through rhythm migration and the music of survival. The floodplain engine rivers that feed giants. The Nemegt world was never still. It pulsed, an immense breathing machine powered by rain and sun, by flood and drought. Every season rewrote the land. Rivers overflowed their banks, carving new channels and leaving behind a patchwork of wetlands, oxbow lakes and silt plains that steamed under the morning heat. When the waters receded, they revealed carpets of green, the tender shoots and reeds that drew the herds back in endless cycles of return. Here life thrived, not despite the floods, but because of them. The rivers were engines of renewal. Each inundation carried with it rich sediment from upstream volcanic highlands, spreading it across the floodplain like a breath of fertility. Ferns, horsetails and cycads sprang from the mud within days, painting the landscape in brilliant greens. Insects swarmed, massive dragonflies with translucent wings shimmered over puddles that mirrored the sky, while turtles and crocodiliforms glided through flooded channels, silent as shadows. For the herds of Sauropods, this was paradise reborn. As the first rays of morning warmed the wet earth, they moved slowly out of the higher terraces, their young wobbling close beside them. Adults grazed along the edges of receding water, pulling at the softest shoots. The ground was thick with footprints, some fresh, others already hardening in the drying mud. From the air, if one could have seen it, the floodplain would have resembled a living tapestry, rivers, gleaming like silver veins, green corridors winding between patches of open sand and countless trails converging at the last pools of water. This was a land made for cycles, and each creature had its rhythm. Tiny mammals darted through underbrush, feasting on fallen seeds. Lizards warmed themselves on sunlit stones. Crocodile-like predators lurked in the shallows, waiting for the carelessness of thirst. Fish schools moved in unison, flashing like molten metal whenever sunlight pierced the surface. Overhead pterosaurs traced lazy arcs, scanning for carcasses stranded by the flood's retreat. To the naked eye, the scene was tranquil, a prehistoric Eden. But balance here was fragile, and it was built on the ever-turning wheel of life and decay. Each drowned carcass became a feast for scavengers. Each fallen tree uprooted by the storm currents created new shelter for insects and amphibians. Even the floods themselves were both blessing and curse. They nourished life, but they also erased it. In one such season, a violent storm rolled in from the horizon, darkening the skies with thunder and the scent of ozone. Within hours, rain hammered the earth, filling the dry beds once more. Hadrosaurs and smaller creatures sought higher ground, clustering on ridges as the lowlands disappeared beneath swirling brown water. Turtles rode the currents like driftwood, while crocodiles surged forward, their eyes barely breaking the surface. From above, pterosaurs veered inland to escape the wind, their wings slicing through rain. When the storm passed, silence fell thick, almost reverent. Then came the first signs of renewal, steam rising from the soaked soil, dragonflies emerging from nymph casings, the chirr of small reptiles testing the air. Within days, the floodplain awoke again. New leaves unfolded, and the scent of rot gave way to the sweetness of life beginning anew. This constant alternation between destruction and creation was the heartbeat of the Nemesis ecosystem. It dictated migrations, feeding patterns, and the very shapes of the animals themselves. Wide feet and long tails balanced movement across unstable ground. Tall herbivores could feed above flooded shrubs. Predators adapted to ambush along channel edges rather than chase across open plains. Every feature of their anatomy, every muscle, claw and beak was a conversation with the river's moods. The floodplains also served as nursery grounds. Fossilized nesting sites suggest that certain areas were chosen year after year by hadrosaur herds, the soft alluvial soil ideal for digging shallow nests. Here in the safety of abundance, eggs were laid and guarded. Hatchlings emerged into a world of warmth and danger, learning to walk as dragonflies skimmed the pools beside them. It was a fragile peace. Predators prowled the outskirts, drawn by scent and sound, but the sheer number of young ensured the survival of the herd. On the periphery of the wetlands, the predators waited. Sleek Alioramus lurked behind stands of reeds, its golden eyes fixed on the shadows that moved. Crocodiliforms drifted closer under the guise of floating logs. Even the skies held danger as dark-eyed pterosaurs sometimes swooped to snatch the smallest hatchlings from the shallows. Yet in this web of peril, life thrived. Every risk was answered by adaptation, every loss balanced by abundance. Over millions of years, these cycles etched themselves into the very geology of the region. Each flood left a layer of sand and silt, each drought a crust of clay. The result was a geological diary, a rhythm of wet and dry, of life and death. To the trained eye, those layers are not static, they move, sing and breathe. They are the heartbeat of an ecosystem perfectly attuned to the tempo of its rivers. When paleontologists today stand in those ancient floodplains, they can still read the echoes of that rhythm. The grain of the rock shows the flow of vanished waters. The scatter of bones reveals where a herd once gathered, or where a storm trapped them mid-migration. In every flood layer lies evidence of both devastation and rebirth, proof that even in deep time the cycle of life was never broken. Here in the Nemegt, the rivers did more than feed the giants. They wrote their names in silt and song, and though the waters are long gone, their legacy still runs beneath the dunes unseen but eternal. Dinosaurus, the strangest omnivore. For half a century, Dinosaurus was a ghost, a name built from arms alone. In 1965, paleontologists uncovered a pair of massive forelimbs in the Mongolian desert, each stretching over 2 meters long. The body they belonged to was missing, swallowed by time. All that remained were those arms, enormous, blunt-clawed and alien. They seemed to hint at something powerful, perhaps monstrous. For decades, no one could picture the creature they came from. It was as if nature had written only half a sentence, daring us to guess the rest. When the full skeleton was finally discovered in 2014, the mystery deepened instead of fading. What emerged from the sand was not a predator as many had imagined, but something far stranger, an omnivorous giant that defied classification. Dinosaurus mirificus. The strange hand stood 12 feet tall and stretched over 36 feet from bill to tail. Its spine rose into a towering sail, its skull ended in a broad duck-like bill, and its body combined the anatomy of predator and grazer, bird and reptile absurdity and genius. Its arms, once imagined as killing tools, proved to be built for reach, not for rending. The claws were blunt, more like paddles than knives, ideal for sweeping vegetation or dredging through soft mud in search of buried plant matter and small prey. The legs were thick and powerful, but not the sprinting limbs of a hunter. They were made for stability, for wading through the flooded deltas of the Nemegt. Picture a creature the size of a bus walking through waist-deep water, its every step stirring schools of fish and mud turtles from the reeds. Its bill, wide and toothless, acted like a shovel. With each sweep of its head, Dinosaurus could scoop up both aquatic plants and the small animals hiding among them. Fossilized stomach contents tell the tale clearly. A mix of stomach stones, gastroliths used to grind tough vegetation alongside fish remains. This was an animal that straddled worlds, not strictly herbivore, not truly carnivore, but something in between, a specialist of the in-between. In a sense, Dinosaurus was the shoebill stalk of the Mesozoic. Like the modern shoebill-stalking African wetlands, it likely stood motionless for long stretches, watching the surface ripple before striking down with precision. Its long neck gave reach, its bill could sweep side to side, and its sheer bulk made it nearly invincible in its watery domain. Yet unlike a bird, its digestion resembled that of a fermenting machine. Deep in its gut, microbes broke down fibrous plant matter, producing the energy needed to sustain its colossal frame. The result was a creature that moved slowly but constantly, an unstoppable grazer of mud and weed. Its sail-like back, formed by elongated neural spines, may have helped it regulate heat in the humid floodplain. During the day, when the sun scorched the landscape, blood could circulate through the sail to release excess warmth. By night, it might have absorbed the remaining heat from the air. In motion, the sail swayed above the reeds like a moving dune, a living landmark on the horizon. To smaller animals, the sight must have been both mesmerizing and terrifying, a silent mountain drifting through mist. The coexistence of such giants demanded subtle strategies. Dinosaurus had few natural enemies, though. A determined Tarbosaurus might have risked a hunt when food was scarce. Yet its bulk and reach made it a difficult target, and its long arms could deliver sweeping blows powerful enough to break ribs or toss an attacker aside. The fossils even suggest scars and healed fractures, proof that it had faced danger more than once, and lived to tell the tale in bone. Behaviorally, Dinosaurus likely followed the seasonal pulse of the rivers, much like modern herbivores shadow floodplains today. During wet seasons, it foraged in open shallows thick with vegetation. As waters receded, it roamed the exposed mudflats, digging up roots to crustaceans and stranded fish. In drought, it may have followed shrinking channels deeper into the valley, relying on its wide diet when specialists starved. It was not the fastest or fiercest, but it was adaptable, a survivor by compromise. And perhaps most strikingly, Dinosaurus carried itself with an ungainly grace. Reconstructions show it moving much like an ostrich, slowed by gravity, head low back, arched arms, swaying outward to balance its weight. In this strange posture, it bridged two worlds, part lumbering reptile, part elegant bird, and watching it move would have been like witnessing evolution rehearsing ideas, combining traits in a rough draft of future possibilities. Today, its skeleton stands assembled in museums, a monument to nature's willingness to experiment. Its long arms stretch forward, as if still reaching for the next mouthful of green, its bill frozen mid-sweep. And yet somehow, even in stillness, it radiates motion, the patient rhythm of an animal perfectly tuned to its floodplain home. Dinosaurus reminds us that evolution is not a ladder, but a labyrinth. Survival favours not only the strong or swift, but also the flexible, the ones who learn to thrive in the margins between extremes. The strangest omnivore of the Cretaceous was not an accident. It was proof that life, when faced with chaos, invents balance. A storm clears. Scent rises. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with its memory. Across the majestic floodplain, steam rose from the soaked earth, carrying the smell of wet vegetation mud, and something else, something alive. Pools reflected a bruised sky, their surfaces rippling as dragonflies returned to dance over the water. In the silence after thunder, even the wind seemed to hesitate, waiting for the land to breathe again. From the shadow of a fallen tree, a female Tarbosaurus stirred. Her flanks glistened with rain, the scales along her neck catching glints of grey light. For hours she had lain still through the deluge, her nostrils half buried in wet sand to muffle her scent. Hunger gnawed at her belly like fire. The last real kill had been days ago, and the storm had scattered the herd she hunted. But now the wind had changed. A trace rode upon it, faint but unmistakable, the musky scent of Dinosaurus giants of the river valley, slow but dangerous. Her nostrils flared, drawing in the aroma of damp feathers, algae, and living heat. Somewhere ahead, beyond a tangle of sedges, the floodplain's most peculiar residents were moving. She rose to her full height, head swaying slightly as she tested the air again. Her eyes narrowed. In the distance, through the mist, she saw them, a pair of Dinosaurus, shoulder-deep in the shallows, tearing mats of water plants from the mud. Between them, two smaller shapes, juveniles, clumsy and uncertain, still learning to balance their sailback forms against the current. The Tarbosaurus stilled, every nerve calculated. A single adult Dinosaurus could outweigh her, its forearms capable of delivering a bone-breaking strike. Two adults together were an army, but those juveniles, soft-skulled, slow and trusting, would be easy. She watched them for long minutes, letting instinct duel with experience. Predation, after all, is a mathematics of survival. Every hunt is a gamble between hunger and injury. A fractured jaw could mean starvation, a broken leg death. Her species had endured not because of reckless fury, but because of the ability to weigh risk against reward. The ecology of fear shaped not only prey but predators. She crept forward, each step measured. Mud sucked at her feet. Frogs leapt clear from her path. A fish flopped nearby, and her head jerked reflexively toward the sound before she forced herself back to stillness. Ahead, one of the adult Dinosaurus lifted its head abruptly, nostrils flaring. The wind betrayed her. The giant's reaction was immediate. It turned broadside, the sail on its back rising like a banner. With a deep guttural hiss, a sound halfway between a growl and a horn, it signaled the alarm. The second adult stepped closer to the young, sweeping its long arms outward in a defensive gesture, claws raised like wooden scythes. The smaller ones froze for a moment, then pressed themselves between their parents' legs, hidden from view. The Tarbosaurus halted, her yellow eyes locked onto the family. She could almost feel the pulse of their fear, the tension vibrating through the ground. For a heartbeat, the scene held still, predator and prey locked in ancient arithmetic, each reading the other's next move. Then slowly the calculus turned against her. The adults were too large, too united. The element of surprise was gone. The juveniles were shielded. The cost of pursuit would be blood, maybe her own. Hunger urged her forward, but reason held her back. She let out a low, frustrated rumble, a sound swallowed quickly by the wind. Instead, she began to circle a slow, deliberate retreat that could be mistaken for a hunt in progress. Her eyes stayed fixed on the Dinosaurus pair until reeds hid them completely. The giants watched her go, motionless except for the faint ripple of water around their legs. Only when her shadow disappeared into the distance did they relax. One adult lowered its head, nuzzling a juvenile. The other resumed its slow grazing, pulling at floating weeds as if to calm its nerves through habit. The floodplain settled once more. Ripples spread where the Tarbosaurus had walked. Insects began to hum again. Somewhere behind the curtain of mist, a hadrosaur herd called softly, their voices echoing like wind through bamboo. Life continued, not untouched but aware, because even when no predator strikes, its presence reshapes the world. The mere possibility of attack governs where herds graze, when they drink, how far they wander. The shadow of danger is as real a force as the river or the sun. It sculpts behavior, drives migration, decides who thrives and who fades. As the day brightened, the Tarbosaurus disappeared into the low forest beyond the floodplain, her hunger unsatisfied but her body intact. She would hunt again when the odds shifted, perhaps at dusk, perhaps tomorrow. In her wake, the Dinosaurus pair stood like sentinels in the water, the young nestled close, their reflections rippling beneath them. The storm clouds thinned, revealing a pale blue sky, and the smell of rain gave way to the sweet, earthy scent of rebirth. The floodplain had survived another test, as it always had, and the great balance, the quiet, perilous equilibrium between hunter and hunted continued, written invisibly and sent in silence and in the still warm breath of giants. Tarbosaurus, bone crusher of Asia. She was the shadow that haunted every herd. In the late Cretaceous plains of Mongolia, no creature commanded greater respect than Tarbosaurus bata, the bone crusher of Asia. Stretching over 12 meters in length and weighing close to 5 tons, she was a predator built not for speed, but for certainty. When she struck, the world seemed to stop. Closely related to North America's famous Tyrannosaurus rex, Tarbosaurus was a reflection from across the ancient seaway, similar enough to share a bloodline yet shaped by an entirely different continent. Where T-Rex bore a massive wide skull like a sledgehammer, Tarbosaurus's head was narrower and more elongated, its snout built for precision. The difference was subtle but profound. Her jaws were lighter but her reach was longer, her bite angled for quick slicing precision rather than brute bludgeoning. She was not simply a cousin of the king, she was its strategist. The jaws themselves were engines of destruction. With over 60 dagger-like teeth, each the length of a man's hand, she could pierce bone and muscle with terrifying efficiency. Biomechanical modelling suggests her bite force exceeded 6 tons of pressure, enough to shatter a pelvis or crush the vertebrae of a hadrosaur in one decisive strike. The teeth at the front acted like scalpels, gripping and tearing. Those at the back like serrated pliers, cracking through armour and marrow. But Tarbosaurus hunted not only with her teeth. Her greatest weapon was her senses. Her olfactory bulbs, those responsible for smell, were enormous, rivaling that of modern vultures and wolves. Even days after a kill, she could follow the scent of blood on the wind, tracking it through kilometres of forest and marsh. Rain or heat did not erase it. To her, the world was painted in aroma. Every creature, every carcass, every storm carried a unique signature. And when her prey was near, she listened. Studies of tyrannosaurid skulls reveal adaptations for low-frequency hearing, a range below the human threshold. It meant she could detect the deep rumble of a herd long before it was visible, or the soft thud of an animal stepping through her. The world that reached her ears was not noise, but vibration, a symphony of tremors and heartbeats. In the hush of the Nemegt floodplain, that sense made her nearly omniscient. Her eyes, though smaller than a hawk's, faced forward, granting binocular vision and the ability to judge distance precisely. This was the final ingredient in her mastery: smell for discovery hearing, for approach sight for the moment of strike. When all three aligned, death arrived unseen. Yet even the apex hunter of her realm was not alone at the top. The Nemegt ecosystem swarmed with competition. Slender Alioramus prowled the wetlands, its lighter frame favouring speed and smaller prey. Young Tarbosaurs, still too small to challenge adults, occupied their own tier, scavenging carrion and hunting juveniles of other species. Together they formed an intricate niche partitioning system, each species taking its share without it driving the others to extinction. Evolution here favoured specialisation over excess. Adult Tarbosaurus ruled the open floodplain. They targeted hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, even the massive Deinonychus when desperation outweighed caution. Alioramus kept to the forest margins, its longer snout suited to snapping quick reptiles and small ornithomimids. Juveniles, agile and opportunistic, followed behind the herds, cleaning the land of remains their elders had left. The result was an ecosystem in which every hunger had a place, a balance born of brutality but sustained by precision. Despite her strength, Tarbosaurus was no mindless killer. Each hunt required calculation. A misjudged strike could cost her a tooth, a muscle, or her life. Her arms, short with 2 heavy claws, played little role in combat. All her killing power was concentrated forward head-neck jaws. When she lunged, she committed entirely. Her world was binary eat or perish. Fossil evidence hints that she may have lived not entirely alone. Tracks and bone beds suggest loose social structures, perhaps temporary alliances between adults during mating seasons or when scavenging enormous carcasses. Fights were inevitable. Healed bite marks on Tarbosaurus skulls show that, even among their own kind, dominance was proven through pain. And yet for all her violence, she was also a survivor of subtlety. Her narrow skull and long neck allowed her to slip her head into tight spaces between ribs beneath armor plates into the cavities of carcasses where softer meat remained. She could wait days between meals, her metabolism steady, her patience endless. The storm of her appetite was followed by the calm of digestion, the long stillness of an animal utterly at peace with its role in the world's design. When night fell over the Nemegt, her domain expanded. The darkness silenced most creatures, but not her. She prowled by scent and tremor, guided by an ancient sense deeper than sight. The moonlight traced her sail-like back, glinting on scales wet with river spray. Somewhere ahead, a herd of Sauropods shifted uneasily, their sleeping forms stirring in the reeds. She paused, calculating again, not from cruelty, but from hunger's geometry. The air tasted of potential. To us, she is a fossil bones in a museum teeth behind glass. But to her world, she was inevitability incarnate, a force shaped by millions of years of adaptation, as elegant as she was lethal. Tarbosaurus did not dominate because she was larger than others, but because she listened better, smelled sharper, and waited longer. In the grand orchestra of the Cretaceous, she was percussion steady, thunderous, inescapable. When she walked, bones followed. When she fed, ecosystems changed. And when she finally fell, her skeleton became one more note in the eternal rhythm of the floodplain that both birthed and buried her. Life between river and forest edge. After the storms, the world of the Nemegt exhaled. Mist drifted over the water like seared silk, and the light that followed the rain seemed gentler. Gold, pouring through green. Between river and forest edge, life reassembled itself quietly at first. Then in rising layers of sound, the clicking of insects, the croak of amphibians, the distant bellow of some unseen herbivore. The floodplain glittered with 1,000 micro-habitats. Along the old channels where rivers had changed course and abandoned their beds, oxbow lakes lay still as mirrors, shallow crescents of trapped water teeming with movement. Here young fish darted through curtains of aquatic ferns, and amphibians clung to reeds heavy with droplets. Frogs called in rhythmic bursts, their voices echoing across the low basin like raindrops striking hollow logs. Turtles basked on fallen trunks, lifting their heads toward the new warmth. In the shallows, lungfish-like creatures poked through mud for trapped air bubbles, reminders of ancient lineages that had mastered both water and air. Above them, dragonflies the size of sparrows patrolled the airspace, their wings together flashing blue and green like fragments of sky. These delicate predators marked the season's return to plenty, feeding on the swarms of gnats and mayflies that rose from the wet ground in shimmering veils. At the forest edge, a different world began. Towering conifers and ginkgos formed vaulted canopies that filtered sunlight into jade columns. Under their shade grew a tangle of ferns and cycads, their fronds dripping from the earlier rain. The air was cooler here, thick with the musk of rotten soil. It was the kingdom of the small, the mammals, lizards, and birds that lived between shadow and light. Tiny, shrew-like mammals darted through the undergrowth, searching for seeds dislodged by the storm. They were ancestors of future lineages yet to come, creatures of warm blood and sharp senses, who flourished in the margins, thriving, where giants trampled only occasionally. In the roots of trees, they built burrows lined with leaves, a quiet insurance against the chaos above. Lizards, sleek and iridescent, basked on the exposed banks, their scales scattering sunlight into flecks of bronze. They fed on the endless banquet of insects that followed each flood, when stagnant pools bred new life faster than it could be consumed. In their wake came the small predators, juvenile raptors with sickle claws still dulled by youth, testing their instincts on frogs and scurrying mammals. And overhead, the Cretaceous sky thrummed with wings. Primitive birds, small feathered descendants of theropods, flitted between branches chasing clouds of mosquitoes. Some perched on the backs of resting dinosaurs, picking parasites from their hides in a symbiosis older than memory. Their songs, sharp, uneven, exploratory, were perhaps the first echoes of the modern dawn chorus. Further down the river bend, the air shimmered with heat. The gallery forest's thin bands of greenery tracing the waterways gave way to open flats of grass-like plants and clay. This was the meeting place of every kind of life, where hadrosaurs grazed at the water's edge, while crocodiliforms watched from below, where birds skimmed the surface in quick darting flights and turtles crawled up the sand to lay eggs in the soft soil. Each patch of earth carried its own tempo. The Nemegt was not one ecosystem, but many braided together, like the rivers that sustained them. The hush that followed the storm was temporary. Within days, life turned feverish again. Insects erupted from every crevice, a living mist that drew swarms of fish and amphibians. With the insect booms came the predators, small dromaeosaurs, low to the ground, snapping at dragonflies and lizards. Every flood rewound the cycle, birthing abundance from ruin, feeding the web that bound all creatures from the smallest gnat to the largest tyrant. For the Tarbosaurus, the aftermath of rain meant easy tracking. Soft ground held footprints and carrion scents lingered in moist air. For the herds, it was both gift and warning. Lush feeding grounds now, but the water would soon shrink again, and predators would return to the edges, and yet for a brief season peace seemed possible. The floodplain glittered like a mosaic of life, each droplet a universe, each footprint a signature of survival. Evolution was not an event here, but a pulse felt in the tremor of reeds, in the shimmer of wings, in the soft bubbling of water as it retreated into the soil. As dusk fell, a pale haze rose from the warm mud. Fireflies, or their ancient kin, began to flicker under the trees, answering the stars just beginning to appear overhead. In that liminal light, one could almost imagine that time itself slowed, reluctant to disturb such balance. The Nemegt was not merely a world of giants. It was a world of threads, each one delicate, luminous and alive, woven tightly enough to hold an entire age together. Between river and forest in the quiet after rain, life found its rhythm, and the earth, for a fleeting moment, was perfectly whole. Alioramus at dusk. Twilight in the Nemegt came not with silence but with breath. The air thickened, scents sharpened, and the floodplain's chorus shifted from daylight to chatter to the hushed vigilance of hunters. The golden haze that lingered after sunset bled into violet shadow, turning every ripple of grass and flicker of wing into motion half seen. It was an hour when predators stirred, and few wore the twilight better than Alioramus, the ghost of the riverbank. Sleek where her cousin Tarbosaurus was massive, Alioramus measured little more than 6 meters from snout to tail. She was built like a blade, long narrow jaws, lined with more than 70 sharp teeth, a slender skull tapering to a point and limbs finely muscled for balance rather than brute force. If Tarbosaurus was a hammer, Alioramus was a scalpel crafted for precision, speed and timing. Now she walked along the river's edge, her claws sinking softly into the damp clay. The rain had passed hours ago, leaving behind a thin mist that caught the fading light. Each step was measured her tail, counterbalancing the delicate sway of her body. She moved like something halfway between a cat and a crane grace, without haste. Thirst had drawn her here, but instinct kept her cautious. The waterline glittered with danger. Crocodiliforms still lurked beneath its calm surface, their nostrils breaking the water like knots of wood. Alioramus paused, lowering her head, her eyes scanning the mirror of the river, until the faintest current betrayed movement below. She did not drink yet. Instead, she listened. The acoustics of twilight were her advantage. Wind pressed through reeds in waves, each gust carrying information, the distant plash of fish, the low grunt of a hadrosaur herd far upstream, the high glassy hum of insects. Her brain passed these layers effortlessly. Predators that relied only on sight often starved at dusk, but Alioramus hunted by sound, by rhythm. A sudden flutter, small wings beating the air behind her, made her head twitch, but it was only a bird settling on a log. She exhaled slow and steady. Then another noise, soft, syncopated, like the patter of small feet through mud. Her nostrils flared. The scent came next, feathers, dust, and something musky sweet. She turned her head, scanning the far side of the river. There, on a stretch of sand between 2 oxbow pools, moved a flock of Elmosaurus. They were strange ostrich-like creatures, not much taller than a man, with slender necks and tails held perfectly straight as they trotted. Their beaks clicked softly as they foraged for insects beneath the driftwood, oblivious to the eyes watching them from across the water. Even their tracks looked nervous, narrow, quick, never still for long. Alioramus froze. To her, every movement across the floodplain became a geometry of opportunity. The Allosaurus were too large to ambush as one, but if they startled, one might lag and the slowest would fall behind. Her hunger sharpened. She lowered herself until her belly nearly brushed the mud, nostrils barely flaring as she gauged the wind direction. The breeze was in her favor, carrying her scent downstream. She began her stalking choreography. Step pause, listen, tail counter, wait, exhale, silence, stillness. Each motion was part of a ritual older than time itself. Her heartbeat slowed until it matched the pulse of the river. Around her the world contracted into sound and distance, the whisper of reeds brushing her sides, the faint buzz of midges near her eye, ridge, the clicking of Allosaurus beaks like distant rain. She advanced a few more paces, muscles tensed, eyes narrowing. One of the flock raised its head, sensing something it could not name. The others froze. For a breathless moment, predator and prey were locked in a mutual stillness so deep it seemed to stop the world. Then a gust of wind betrayed her. The mist shifted, carrying her scent across the river like an invisible ribbon. The Allosaurus nearest the shore bolted first, emitting a shrill fluting cry. The flock scattered into chaos, feet-churning water wings flapping in panic. Allosaurus lunged. Mud sprayed behind her as she sprinted along the bank, eyes tracking movement across the current. She didn't chase blindly, she calculated, predicting which individual would falter, where they'd turn when exhaustion would slow them. But the river ran deep tonight and the Allosaurus were fast. One leapt across a channel, its hind legs kicking up a sheet of droplets that glittered like broken glass in the fading light. She stopped short, breathing hard, the water swirling around her ankles. The chase was lost. Across the river, the flock vanished into the shadows of the gallery forest, their calls fading into the chorus of frogs. For a moment she stood there, silhouette against the bruised sky, steam curling from her nostrils. Failure did not sting, it was expected. In this world, success was an exception bought by patience. She would wait for the next mistake, the next unlucky straggler. As night deepened, the temperature dropped. Mist thickened over the water, muffling sound, erasing scent. The predator stepped back from the river's edge and melted into the reeds, her outline dissolving, until only the faint ripple of her wake betrayed where she'd been. The Nemegt was a land that rewarded adaptation over dominance, and Allosaurus was its perfect expression, a hunter of twilight thriving in the slivers between day and night, shadow and sound. She was not the largest nor the fiercest, but in her subtlety lay her strength. The floodplain quieted once more, save for the low hum of crickets and the occasional plunk of a fish rising to feed. The moon emerged above the horizon, silvering the water, and somewhere in the darkness a pair of eyes blinked once, watching, waiting, listening. There she's... The chase. El Mrs. Sozo. The Saurus runs. The forest swallowed light faster than sound. Beyond the riverbank, shadows gathered thick as smoke, and in that half-world between dusk and night the chase began. The Allosaurus slipped into the undergrowth, her body low, her breath steady. Ahead, the Allosaurus flock had scattered among the gnarled roots of ancient trees, their long legs flashing pale in the gloom. The forest was their refuge, dense, confusing, full of obstacles that broke sight lines and muffled pursuit. But it was also their trap. Each Allosaurus faced the same primal equation that had governed life since its beginning, run or die trying. Fight was never an option for them. They were speed incarnate, not strength. Their bodies, lean and hollow-boned, were made for escape, powerful hind limbs, whiptails for balance, feathers pressed tight against the wind. On open plains they could outrun nearly anything. But here, in the clutching maze of forest and vine speed, met geometry, and geometry could kill. Allosaurus advanced with patience sharpened into instinct. Her nostrils flared, her pupils widened to draw in what little light filtered through the canopy. She heard them before she saw them, the faint patter of feet, the rustle of fronds brushing feathers, the small cries of panic echoing from every direction. Each sound painted a map inside her mind. The flock's unease spiked. Allosaurus were social creatures bound by the safety of numbers, but when danger struck, that unity fractured. In an instant, cohesion became chaos, a phenomenon modern ecologists would one day call the predator confusion effect. To a hunter's eyes, 100 moving bodies merge into one storm of motion. Which one to strike, which shadow hides the slower heartbeat? The predator hesitates, the prey gains seconds. Seconds mean survival. Allosaurus knew this, though she did not know why. She had learned it by hunger. She lunged not at the center of motion, but at its edge, where panic peeled one creature from the herd. A young Allosaurus, smaller and slower, had turned sharply to avoid a fallen log. That half-second of choice doomed it. The predator's claws gripped the mud. Her tail snapped side to side for balance, and in 3 strides she closed the distance. The forest erupted in noise branches, breaking wings, flapping, the frantic drumming of feet on wet soil. The young Elmosaurus darted left then right, weaving through tree trunks, heart pounding against the hollow of its chest. The forest seemed to conspire in its defense. Low branches tore at the predator's snout vines, coiled around her legs, roots snagged at her claws. But evolution had taught Alioramus precision in narrow spaces. She moved not as a battering ram, but as a surgeon of pursuit, predicting every turn, cutting through confusion like a blade through mist. A break in the trees opened into a patch of open ground, a clearing flooded with moonlight. The Elmosaurus burst through, first sprinting with everything its body could muster. For an instant the predator hesitated at the edge. Open ground was a paradox. It offered speed but stole concealment. The chase became a contest of faith in one's own anatomy. The Elmosaurus zigzagged wildly, its narrow toes kicking up sprays of mud wings outstretched for balance. Each stride was a desperate negotiation between velocity and control. Its mind pulsed with one thought only: stay moving, stay unseen. Alioramus charged after it, the forest behind her exploding into a scatter of leaves. Her breath came in short bursts, her strides longer and faster with each heartbeat. She didn't need to be faster overall, just at the right moment. Each curve of her path was calculated, from the twitch of her prey's tail, each pivot a geometry of muscle and intent. The ecology of decision played out in real time, a battle not of strength but of timing and nerve. For 20 seconds the world contracted to pursuit. No sound existed but their breath and the slap of feet against earth. Then luck or physics intervened. The Elmosaurus misjudged the slickness of a slope. Its foot skidded, sending its body rolling down the embankment into a shallow creek. It thrashed disoriented feathers, clinging wet to its sides. Alioramus leapt. Her jaws closed on empty air as the prey twisted, at the last instant splashing through the current and scrambling up the opposite bank. The noise shattered the night, the splash, the hiss, the cry of panic drawing the rest of the flock, which screamed warnings from the trees beyond. The confusion multiplied, more motion, more noise. For a predator it was both advantage and torment. Alioramus hesitated, jaws dripping her quarry now beyond reach. She could wade the stream, but doing so would sap the strength she needed for another sprint. The energy cost outweighed the prize. Once again, instinct overruled hunger. She stood in the shallow water, panting, her reflection trembling beneath her. The Elmosaurus escaped into the thickets, the forest swallowing them like smoke, returning to the air. Only silence remained, the kind of silence that grows after exertion, heavy and absolute. For the hunter, the night was not lost. Every failed pursuit was data, an imprint of angles of distance of wind. The forest had taught her more than victory ever could. She turned back toward the river, head low, tail trailing like a tired banner. Above her, the canopy rustled as small birds settled back onto their perches. Somewhere in the darkness, frogs resumed their calls, cautious at first, then louder, until the forest once again pulsed with the heartbeat of life reclaimed. Predation in the Nemegt was not constant slaughter. It was balanced pressure and release, silence and motion, hunger and restraint. Tonight the Elmosaurus had won its reprieve, tomorrow the cycle would reset. For now the forest belonged again to the whispers of leaves, to the drip of water from high branches, and to the faint imprint of 2 parallel trails in the mud, the hunters and the hunted side by side, soon to be washed away by the next rain, where rivers brayed into swamps. If the Nemegt rivers were the veins of this ancient world, then the wetlands were its beating heart. Here the broad flood channels that once sliced through the plains began to braid, splitting and weaving into a labyrinth of shallow waterways, mudflats and reed-choked deltas. The land and water no longer knew where one ended and the other began. They mingled, traded and nourished everything that dared to live between them. This was the living edge of the Cretaceous, a place of constant change. Channels diverged, met again and diverged once more, an endless choreography of sediment and current. Each fork in the flow birthed new habitats, one path feeding a tranquil lagoon shaded by trees, another spilling into open marshland where sunlight flashed off 1,000 rippling scales. The Nemegt Delta system was not one landscape, but many layered upon each other, shifting daily with the rhythm of the water. And with every shift, life multiplied. These swamps were factories of creation. Nutrient cycling, the unseen machinery of the ecosystem, thrummed beneath the surface. Each flood carried minerals and organic debris from far upriver, volcanic ash from distant eruptions, the bones of fish, the leaves of drowned forests. Bacteria and algae fed on that bounty, releasing bursts of energy that climbed the food web from plankton to crustaceans, from fish to reptiles, from reptiles to the giants that ruled the land. In this way, death upstream became life downstream. In nature's arithmetic, wetlands are multipliers. Every drop of water entering a swamp spends its energy slowly spreading, depositing, feeding. What erosion takes away, the delta restores. What the flood destroys, the marsh rebuilds. That same slow movement made these wetlands the perfect trap for time. Sediment drifted gently to the bottom, sealing away leaves, shells, even footprints before scavengers could erase them. Decay slowed in the anoxic muck where oxygen was scarce but preservation was rich. Every year a thin film of new silt layered over the last, pressing the past gently downward. Millions of years later, that patience would become fossil gold, a record so complete that it could hold not only bones, but stories of behavior, drought, and death. To walk through this ancient delta would have been to step into a world of color and texture. The air shimmered with heat and humidity. Water mirrored clouds the size of continents. Crocodiliforms lay motionless, disguised as islands. Insects hovered above water lilies, their wings slicing through the heavy air. Flocks of primitive birds rested on driftwood, calling across the stillness with short metallic cries. Every patch of reeds hid a drama hatchlings, testing the air, and turtles lumbering ashore to bury eggs, amphibians surfacing to gulp breath and vanish again. In the shallows, fish schools pulsed like liquid light, scattering whenever a shadow fell across them. Long-legged dinosaurs waded carefully through the knee-deep water, their movements slow and deliberate, stirring up the silt where mollusks buried themselves. Somewhere a juvenile Tarbosaurus tested its reflection in the surface, snapping at ripples, learning the patience its lineage demanded. It was a land that refused definition. Swamp, river, forest, lake, each one became the other in turn. For the animals that lived here, survival meant flexibility. Herbivores browsed both on land and in water, their diets shifting with each season's flood. Carnivores learned to ambush from the shallows rather than chase across open plains. Birds nested on the high mounds built by ancient river currents, trusting elevation more than distance. Over millennia, the sediments of these wetlands built layer upon layer, a geological tapestry recording not just species but process. Every ripple mark, every plant stem turned to coal-black trace told of water's delicate handwriting. Paleontologists studying the Nemegt know this rivers make worlds, but wetlands remember them. In modern times, their descendants still perform the same work. The Pantanal, the Okavango, the Mekong all are echoes of the Nemegt's ancient rhythm. Each one proves the same rule: wherever water slows, life accelerates. And when life flourishes, so too does memory. When the last light of day glimmered off the swamp's mirrored surface, the delta looked almost alive in its own right, breathing through vapor, pulsing through flow. 1,000 microcurrents drifted past one another, tiny universes of silt and seed and bone. In that stillness lay the secret of eternity. To preserve, one must surrender to change. As the night deepened, frogs began their chorus again, an unbroken lineage of sound that perhaps had already begun here 70 million years ago. The stars shimmered in the water's reflection, and beneath them unseen, the first bones of tomorrow were settling gently into the mud. Bagara-Aten, the small hunter in doubt. Among the heavyweights of the Nemegt there lived shadow, smaller predators whose names barely whisper in the fossil record. They left behind no monumental skeletons, no towering skulls or thunderous trackways, only fragments, teeth, a jawbone, a partial spine. Yet from these traces entire stories bloom. One such ghost is Bagara-Aten Ostromi, the small hunter. Its name comes from the Mongolian bagar, meaning small and Raetan hunter, a modest title for an animal that once cut through the wetlands like a blade. At roughly 3 to 4 meters long, Bagara-Aten was dwarfed by Tarbosaurus, but it compensated with speed and agility. Its bones suggest a slender, lightly built frame, long hind limbs, a whip tail for balance, and jaws designed not for brute force but for precision. It hunted in the margins between riverbank and forest, where water met grass, where stealth was stronger than strength. In the marshy soil, Bagara-Aten would have moved with feline caution, testing each patch of mud before committing its weight. Fish lizards, small mammals, perhaps even the hatchlings of hadrosaurs, all could have been prey. Its teeth reserved and finely serrated hint at quick kills, swift bites followed by retreat, avoiding confrontation with larger predators. It was a creature of opportunity, thriving on the refuse and rhythm of bigger lives. One fossil site paints an intriguing picture. A half-decayed carcass perhaps of a young Dinosaurus lay half-buried in silt. Scattered nearby were small needle-like teeth, too delicate for Tarbosaurus, too serrated for dromaeosaurs. To some paleontologists, this was Bagraatan's calling card, a scavenger come to feed after the storms. Others argue those teeth belonged to a juvenile tyrannosaurid, and thus began the debate that would follow the species for decades. For years, Bagraaton stood proudly in museum catalogues as its own genus, a small distinct predator that filled the ecological niche between raptors and tyrants. But science is never content with first drafts. In 2024, a team of researchers revisited the original fossils using micro-CT scans and comparative modelling. What they found was unsettling. The bones didn't quite fit together. The skull fragment matched one kind of predator, the hip another. Some pieces bore proportions closer to a young Tarbosaurus. Others echoed features of ornithomimids, the ostrich-like dinosaurs of the plains. Was Bagraaton a single species or a chimera, an accidental mix of multiple animals fused by time and circumstance? The fossils had come from a region where bones from many creatures often washed together during floods. It's possible that nature herself assembled this puzzle from unrelated parts, and science centuries later mistook the collage for a single life. And yet, despite this uncertainty, Bagraaton remains officially recognized for now. Until more complete remains are found, it occupies a kind of scientific limbo, too distinct to dismiss, too incomplete to confirm. It stands as a symbol of how paleontology, unlike myth, revises itself. In science, truth is never a fixed monument, it's a scaffolding under construction. Each discovery adds a beam, each doubt removes one. What survives is not certainty, but clarity. The debate over Bagraaton reminds us that fragmentary fossils are both a gift and a challenge. They force us to confront the limits of knowledge and imagination. From a single vertebra, scientists attempt to reconstruct a world. From a jaw fragment, they infer an animal's speed diet and place in the food chain. Each hypothesis is a bridge across millions of years built on bones the size of a hand. Some bridges hold, others collapse, and in their ruins, understanding grows. To stand in the Nemeg today is to stand where truth is still being negotiated. Perhaps Bagraaton was a juvenile tyrant testing its strength in the swamps. Perhaps it was a unique lineage, an evolutionary experiment that left no descendants. Or perhaps it was both proof that the boundaries we draw between species are as fluid as the rivers that buried them. As night settles over the fossil beds, one can almost imagine the little hunter still moving through the reeds, low to the ground, eyes glinting. Body poised between caution and hunger. Whether real or reconstructed, its spirit remains in the sediment, a whisper that even the smallest predator can leave a mystery too large to silence. The Tyrannosaurus, the gentle blaze. In a world ruled by teeth, there walked a creature of claws. To see Tyrannosaurus coloniformis emerging from the mist of the Nemeg floodplain would have been to question the logic of evolution itself. 10 meters long, 5 tons in weight, its enormous body swayed on hind limbs that looked borrowed from a predator. Yet its head, small-beaked and almost delicate, told another story entirely. This was no killer. This was the gentle blade of the Cretaceous, a giant that chose leaves over flesh. Its most famous feature, of course, was its hands, each arm stretching longer than a man is tall, ending in claws that could reach 1 full meter in length. Curved like scythes, those claws were not forged for slashing prey but for harvesting life. They could pull down the upper branches of conifers, strip fronds from cycads, or rake through the soft vegetation that grew along the wetlands. In motion, they must have seemed both graceful and absurd arms, swinging like pendulums, claws glinting like obsidian under the sun. The Tyrannosaurus stood as an evolutionary paradox, a theropod kin to the fiercest carnivores, yet entirely herbivorous. Its skull bore no slicing teeth, but leaf-shaped ones ideal for grinding. Its long neck gave it reach among the treetops, while a wide barrel-like torso housed a massive gut for fermenting plant matter, a biological furnace that converted foliage into fuel. Its gait was slow and deliberate, designed for balance rather than pursuit. Paleobiologists believe it was a selective browser, not a grazer. Like modern giraffes or okapis, it likely picked through the vegetation with intent, choosing the tender shoot seed-bearing branches or mineral-rich leaves that other herbivores ignored. Every swing of its claws may have been part of a complex feeding ritual: hook, pull, tear, gather, and consume. Within that rhythm, one can almost imagine the soft sound of branches giving way, the whisper of claws slicing air rather than flesh. But being gentle did not mean being safe. The same claws that fed Tyrannosaurus also protected it. When cornered, those scythes became deterrents capable of tearing through a predator's skin. Even Tarbosaurus, the apex hunter of the Nemegt, would have thought twice before attacking a creature that could strike from 3 meters away. Fossilized forearm bones suggest remarkable muscle attachments, evidence that these arms were not merely ornamental but powerful, capable of swinging with enough force to break bone. Yet brute defense alone would not ensure survival. Tyrannosaurus likely relied on behavioral caution, feeding in groups, staying near the cover of tall vegetation, and choosing times of day when predators were least active. Its size deterred ambush. Its patience ensured endurance. In a landscape of speed and violence, this slow-moving herbivore found safety in strategy. Its world, however, was never without tension. Imagine a scene at dawn, the light just piercing through the canopy mist curling around tree trunks. A pair of Tyrannosaurs wade through the shallows, their claws cutting delicate arcs as they drag branches closer to feed. Nearby, a Tarbosaurus watches from the edge of the forest, eyes glinting through reeds. She calculates distance, wind, and reward. The herbivores are enormous but clumsy. If she could isolate one, the risk might be worth it. The larger Tyrannosaur lifts its head. Its throat vibrates with a low resonant sound, half hiss, half hum. The predator pauses. The claws rise, dripping with water. For a long minute, neither moves. Then the Tarbosaurus turns away, her instincts whispering that hunger can wait. The gentle blades return to their meal. Tyrannosaurus was not alone in its lineage. It belonged to a strange branch of the theropod family tree, the Tyrannosaurs, creatures that blurred the boundary between predator and prey, reptile and bird. Their feathers, simple and hair-like, likely coated the body, giving it insulation against chill nights. Some scientists even proposed that males displayed differently coloured feathers during mating season, perhaps soft blues or russet tones glinting in the morning light. Within their massive torsos churned an ecosystem of their own bacteria and microbes working symbiotically to break down cellulose. The process released methane and heat byproducts of digestion that might have steamed faintly from their nostrils on cool mornings, like the breath of living furnaces. In this way, Tyrannosaurus became both garden and gardener, sustaining itself and the cycle it lived within. To modern eyes, it seems almost mythic, a beast too strange to be real, too contradictory to have thrived. And yet it did. It flourished for millions of years, proof that evolution rewards not only ferocity, but also adaptation through peace. In its stillness lay wisdom, the understanding that survival does not always require teeth, that strength can take the form of restraint. Long after its bones turn to stone, its legend endures, a symbol of harmony, carved in claw and bone. When paleontologists first uncovered its massive hands, they thought they'd found the weapons of a monster. Instead, they had found the tools of a gardener of deep time, a creature that shaped the forest by touch, that lived gently among giants, and that reminded even the fiercest predators that power comes in many forms. When the water fails. The Namek world was a kingdom of plenty, but only when the rains remembered it. When they didn't, the land forgot itself. Rivers shrank into threads, ponds retreated into cracks, and the air thickened with the scent of dust and resin. The once green floodplain turned the colour of bone. In those weeks of drought, survival became an equation measured not in strength or size, but in endurance. Every creature from the tallest sauropod to the smallest mammal entered the same grim arithmetic. How far could the body travel before the body broke? The herds that once roamed freely now clung to the last corridors of shade. Gallery forests, those thin winding strips of greenery that followed the ghost of the river, became sanctuaries, fragile veins of life pulsing through desolation. Beneath the trees, heat shimmered like glass. Herds of Sauropods pressed together in uneasy silence, conserving energy. Adults shielded juveniles with their bulk, moving only when absolutely necessary. Even predators abandoned pursuit. In drought, the cost of motion outweighed its reward. The floodplains cracked open. The oxbow lakes that once mirrored the sky were now basins of hardened clay, their edges rimmed with salt. In the deeper hollows, turtles buried themselves in mud cocoons, sealing moisture inside their shells. Amphibians retreated underground, waiting in a torpor that could last months. Small mammals scavenged at night, their bodies cooled. By the darkness, their paws tracing invisible paths between roots and burrows. But the drought also revealed a different world, a scrubland of tenacity. Hardy shrubs and dwarf conifers spread across the hills, their roots twisting deep in search of water veins. Where most trees surrendered their leaves, these plants thickened them or Hoarding moisture like secrets, herbivores adapted accordingly. The hadrosaurs shifted diets from lush greens to dry, woody stems, their jaws grinding bark to powder. The great therizinosaurs stood under sun-scorched trees, pulling down brittle branches and stripping what little sustenance they could find. The air itself became a weapon. Winds blew hot, scouring the land in waves that stung eyes and flayed skin. Dust storms erased the horizon. Even the sun seemed heavier, its light turned pale and merciless. Across the dunes, shimmering mirages danced like ghosts of the vanished rivers, tricking thirsty travelers into ruin. Every drop of water became currency, and every waterhole a battleground. The last remaining pools, fed by slow seepage from the subsoil, turned brackish but irresistible. Around them gathered the desperate herds, predators and scavengers alike. A fragile truce ruled these places. Sauropods and Tarkia drank side by side, eyes fixed on the opposite bank. Tarbosaurus circled in the distance, pacing the edges, but rarely attacking. Even she understood the economics of drought kill here, and the waterhole might be lost to chaos. But not all encounters ended peacefully. Sometimes when the wind fell silent, a rustle could trigger panic. One false move, a startled bird, a falling branch, and the plain erupted into violence. Hooves thundered, tails lashed, claws met armor. In those moments, water turned red and dust rose like smoke, the sun glinting off it as if the desert itself were aflame. Then as quickly as it began, stillness returned. Only the ripples at the pool's edge betrayed what had happened. Above, pterosaurs circled lazily, their shadows gliding across the cracked ground. They waited for death the way fishermen wait for tide, knowing drought always ends in feast. Each carcass they found would soon be dry and weightless, another fossil waiting for floodwaters that might never come. As the weeks dragged on, life retreated into strategy. Shade became shelter, emotion became rationed. Dinosaurs dug with claws and snouts, unearthing roots swollen with stored water. Some scraped at the ground until brine oozed up, licking it, the mineral taste like salvation. Others followed ancient trails toward the foothills, guided by memory more than scent. To the paleontologist's eye, this era left a signature of hardship, thin growth lines in bone, isotopic shifts in teeth. Layers of wind-blown silt between flood deposits, a geological record of thirst. Even millions of years later, the Earth itself remembers the stress in its chemistry. And yet in this desolation, life endured. The drought carved weakness from the strong, but left behind survivors honed by scarcity. It was nature's quiet audit, a test of resilience that reshaped the ecosystem with every passing season. When the first clouds finally returned, small grey and trembling with promise, the land seemed to hold its breath. The wind changed direction. The smell of ozone returned, faint but electric. Creatures lifted their heads, nostrils flaring, as if they could taste the coming mercy. Soon thunder would roll again, and the cycle would begin anew. Flood feast, drought, survival. The Nemeg Formation was not simply a stage for life, it was a forge tempering every creature that lived upon it. Those who endured its trials carried the memory of thirst in their bones, the instinct to move toward water written into their very blood. For in this land, the failure of water was never the end, only the pause before the world remembered how to live again. Tarkia, the fortress that thinks. In the age of giants, survival did not always belong to the swift or the savage. Sometimes it belonged to those who stood their ground. Among the most remarkable of the Nemeg survivors was an armoured tank of bone and instinct, the ankylosaurid Tarkia Kielanae, whose name means the brainy one. To see it move across the parched plain was to watch the earth itself come alive, low, steady, unstoppable. At 6 meters long and weighing over 5 tons, Tarkia was a fortress of evolution. Its body was shielded from snout to tail in interlocking plates of bone osteoderms fused directly into its skin. Between the plates, smaller nodules formed a living mosaic, giving the creature both protection and flexibility. Along its flanks rose rows of spikes, each one a deterrent, each one a silent promise of pain. And at the end of its tail swung its signature weapon, a dense mace-like club capable of delivering a bone-crushing blow. One strike could shatter a predator's leg, or perhaps more often its confidence. Yet for all its armour, Tarkia was no brute. Its brain case was proportionally larger than those of its close relatives, suggesting a more complex sensory world, an animal capable of learning, remembering and anticipating danger rather than merely reacting to it. This intelligence was not abstract. It was practical wisdom honed by droughts, floods, and the endless chess game of survival. When the wetlands vanished and the land cracked under the sun, Tarkia endured through strategy. Its body design conserved water, its thick hide reducing evaporation. It fed not on lush leaves but on hardy drought-resistant plants, low shrubs, woody stems and roots. It dug up with clawed forelimbs. The beak that once stripped ferns now crushed dry vegetation, grinding it into pulp. And while other herbivores migrated in desperation, Tarkia often stayed slow-moving, deliberate, trusting in its armor and its patience. But intelligence, even in dinosaurs, revealed itself in observation. Fossil evidence hints that ankylosaurs like Tarkia may have followed aerial cues, watching pterosaur flight patterns to locate dwindling water sources. Just as modern elephants watch birds to find rain-fed pools, Tarkia might have lifted its heavy head eyes, tracing the sky for the wide circling shadows that gathered above moisture or carrion. When the flying reptiles began to drift in a particular direction, the armoured herds followed, trudging across the shimmering flats toward promise. They likely travelled in loose groups, not out of affection, but of vigilance. One Tarkia could guard while another drank. Their armour made them nearly impervious to most attacks, but even fortresses must rest. When they gathered around the last waterholes, they formed living barricades, their spiked tails overlapping in a ring, each one facing outward, eyes, low nostrils twitching at every hint of movement. Predators like Tarbosaurus seldom risked an encounter with such disciplined defence. In the barren heart of drought, they sought not only water, but minerals, the hidden salts and nutrients leached from the soil by long cycles of flood and evaporation. At natural mineral licks, they may have dug shallow pits, scraping at the ground to ingest the powdery earth, replenishing what their diets lacked. These sites could have become the social crossroads of the desert footprints from multiple individuals layered upon each other, the record of a cautious congregation bound by need. When the air shimmered hottest and even the horizon wavered, Tarkia employed the art of stillness. It rested in depressions dug into the dust, lowering its body temperature by lying against the cooler subsoil. The shade of its own bulk, the slow pace of its heartbeat, and its near-impervious armor allowed it to outlast the fury of the sun. To an observer, it might have seemed lifeless, a boulder forgotten by time, but behind those armored eyelids, a slow intelligence watched and waited. Night brought relief. Under starlight, Tarkia stirred again, its nostrils flaring to catch the scent of distant moisture. Perhaps on certain nights, lightning flickered beyond the horizon, and it would lift its head, sensing the vibration of thunder through the ground before sound reached the air. To such creatures, the coming of rain was not an event, but a prophecy fulfilled. The first drops that finally fell would hiss against its armor, leaving tiny trails in the dust. Around it, the plain would begin to exhale, releasing the scent of petrichor and distant life. Tarkia would move slowly into the open, each footstep deliberate, tail swaying like a pendulum. It had survived not through might or hunger, but through understanding the rhythm of scarcity, the patience to wait, the sense to endure. Even in death, Tarkia left the land a lesson. Fossilized skeletons of ankylosaurs are often found in resting postures, limbs folded, tails curled beneath them, as though they simply decided one day to sleep and let the earth reclaim them. Over millions of years, their armor became stone, their silence became permanence. In a world where strength was often loud, Tarkia was the quiet survivor, a thinker behind armor, a creature that listened to the skies and trusted the slow wisdom of its bones. And as the first rains returned to the Namek, washing the dust from its plated back, the fortress that thought simply blinked against the storm and carried on. The long walk to water. The drought deepened until the land itself seemed to ache. Every footstep struck a hollow sound from the ground-cracked clay, drumming beneath the weight of creatures too stubborn to die. Across the Nemegyt Basin, life had slowed to its last reserves. Herds moved like ghosts over a landscape of ash and mirage, every horizon wavering with heat. The rivers that once fed the valley were gone, reduced to strings of disconnected pools, each one guarded like treasure. What had been a lush mosaic of wetlands was now a map of desperation. Mud turned to powder. Carcasses marked the roots of the unlucky Sauropods fallen on the march, a small predator baked where it lay. Even the wind had grown thin, its breath carrying not the scent of water, but of dust and decay. In these times, survival was measured not by dominance, but by endurance. For every creature that walked, the body became both a burden and a weapon. Heat stress was the unseen killer. Muscles overheated, blood thickened, breath came shallow. To endure, the great herbivores slowed their hearts, lowering metabolism to a near crawl. Their massive bodies, once engines of appetite, now became storage tanks of life, a reserve of moisture and minerals to be rationed second by second. Smaller animals adapted differently. Nocturnal habits returned. Daylight became exile, and so when the sun fell, the march began. Under a pale sky heavy with dust, silhouettes emerged: hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs, small ornithomimids, all moving in the same direction, drawn by some ancient instinct, perhaps the smell of damp clay or the distant cries of pterosaurs that still found fish somewhere far ahead. The nights were cooler but not kind. Even the stars shimmered behind the haze, their light trembling as if from exhaustion. Among them trudged a lone tarsier, its armor streaked white with salt. Each breath came slow, deliberate, a whisper through cracked nostrils. It had walked for days across this wasteland, guided by vibrations through the earth, perhaps sensing the faint hum of groundwater below. Behind it, a juvenile Sauropods followed at a cautious distance, drawn by the same promise. Predator and prey no longer mattered. Thirst erased the hierarchy of hunger. By dawn, the travellers reached what remained of a waterhole, a shallow depression rimmed with dying reeds. The pool was barely more than a skin of mud reflecting the sky, but it shimmered like salvation. Around its edge gathered a congregation of the desperate herds of smaller hadrosaurs. A pair of Dinosaurus stooped low. Even a gaunt Tarbosaurus crouched at the far side, her ribs visible beneath taut skin. There was a silence at first, tense, electric. Each creature knew that one wrong move could shatter the fragile peace. But the drought had forged something rare in prehistory, a truce of necessity. The Tarbosaurus lowered her head to drink, one eye fixed warily on the Dinosaurus pair. They did not challenge her. They drank too, scooping muddy water into their wide bills, their reflections rippling beside hers. Nearby turtles surfaced, briefly gasping, then sank again. A lone pterosaur circled overhead, wings casting flickering shadows over the assembly, like the hands of a clock marking borrowed time. For a few brief hours, the Nemegt breathed as one organism, predator and prey sharing the same fragile artery of water. But scarcity always tests peace. As the sun rose higher, the pool shrank further, its edges collapsing into sludge. The air thickened with insects. A hadrosaur herd pressed too close, pushing others aside. One stumbled, splashing mud toward the Tarbosaurus. The predator's patience broke. She lunged jaws, snapping not to kill but to defend her claim. Panic spread instantly. The Dinosaurus lifted its head, roaring a low warning. Dust exploded as dozens of hooves tore through the basin. When it cleared, only silence and broken mud remained. By dusk, the survivors moved on, leaving behind only prints already hardening under the heat. The waterhole, once a meeting place of truce, was now a tomb of thirst. That night, the landscape glowed faintly under the moon. The animals travelled again, guided by smell, by habit, by hope. Some followed the faint calls of pterosaurs. Others followed stars mirrored in the sand, mistaking illusion for salvation. The Nemegt was a master of mirage it offered, the shape of water long after the last drop had gone. Yet even in this desolation, life refused surrender. The night breeze carried cooler air from distant hills, and somewhere far to the east, clouds began to gather, a whisper of storms to come. One by one, the travellers stopped to rest in shallow hollows. Bodies pressed against the cooler ground. Steam rose from their skin as they slept, releasing the stored heat of the day. The young Sauropods leaned against the armoured flank of the Tarsier, too exhausted to fear her. The old fortress did not move. Beneath a blanket of dust, two species, herbivore and living shield, dreamed the same dream, the sound of running water. In the morning, the mirages would return, the heat would rise again, and the long walk would continue. But for this brief moment under a silent sky and a drifting scent of rain that might be real or might not, peace held. Because in the Nemegt, survival was not conquest. It was persistence, measured not in victories but in steps, the long unending pilgrimage toward the memory of water. Tarbosaurus by night. When the sun abandoned the Nemegt, another kind of kingdom stirred. The floodplain by day belonged to giants, but by night the power shifted to the small and the swift. Between the trees and over the still ponds, the air thickened, with the whisper of wings, the croak of amphibians, and the faint rustle of scales against sand. It was in this shadowed world that Tarbosaurus mongoliensis ruled, a hunter born for darkness. Tarbosaurus was a dromaeosaurid kin to the famous Velociraptor, but smaller and built differently, its proportions tailored not to theatrical leaps but to quiet precision. Barely 2 meters from snout to tail, it was a creature of sinew and silence. Where other raptors wielded scythe-like killing claws on their Second toes, Tarbosaurus bore something subtler, a blunter, thicker. Talon, less of a knife, more of a tool. To paleontologists, this detail changed everything. This claw combined with its sturdy jaw and robust skull suggested that Tarbosaurus hunted with force over finesse. It relied not on graceful slashing but on grappling and biting, pinning prey under its weight while its jaws did the work. The result was a predator specialized for the tough armored herbivores that shared its habitat. In a land of armored backs and bone-headed foes, evolution had shaped a raptor for persistence rather than spectacle. The Namek night gave Tarbosaurus every advantage. Its pupils, broad and forward-facing, captured the faintest shimmer of starlight. Feathers along its body muted sound, turning motion into silence. The air was cooler, denser, and rich with scent trails left behind by the day's exodus to shade. Somewhere in that tapestry of smell and sound, the hunter caught what it sought, the faint musk of Homalocephal, the even-headed lizard. The Homalocephal was an oddity in its own right. A small pachycephalosaur, roughly the size of a large dog, with a flat, thick skull instead of the domed head its cousins bore. Fossil evidence suggests it used that reinforced skull for headbutting displays, not fatal combat, but ritual sparring. Groups of them likely lived in loose bands, clacking their heads together in muffled percussion to test dominance or attract mates. By day they foraged among ferns and low shrubs, their bodies quick, their nerves quicker. By night they huddled in clearings, wary but vulnerable. Tonight the wind was still. The moon cast broken silver across the scrub, glinting off cracked mud and sparse leaves. Tarbosaurus crouched low, every movement choreographed by instinct. Ahead, 3 Homalocephal rested in a semicircle near a patch of reeds, their flat skulls faintly outlined in light. They looked peaceful, but their peace was shallow. Their bodies twitched in half-sleep ears attuned to the world's smallest betrayals. The hunter advanced one step, then another. A reed snapped underfoot and all 3 heads lifted at once. For an instant silence froze time itself, then the first Homalocephal bolted. Tarbosaurus reacted instantly, springing from the shadows with a speed born of hunger. Its blunted, killing claw found purchase in the soft mud, propelling it forward with explosive force. The herd scattered in different directions, their evasion strategy triggered by millennia of survival. In darkness, confusion was safety, each fleeing shape drawing the predator's focus just long enough for the others to vanish. But Tarbosaurus didn't chase blindly. It locked onto the straggler, the smallest whose hind leg had caught momentarily in a tangle of roots. The chase was silent except for the rhythmic thud of feet and the rustle of undergrowth. The Homalocephal darted into the open, using the moonlight to its advantage, its flat skull reflecting the glow as a decoy flash, a primitive camouflage that confused depth perception. Then in an act of pure desperation it turned to fight. Lowering its head, it charged not away but toward the predator. The impact was startling. The thickened skull met Tarbosaurus's ribs with a sharp crack that echoed like the strike of stone. The hunter reeled not from pain but from surprise. The tiny herbivore darted aside, twisting its body and vanishing behind a clump of dry reeds before Tarbosaurus could recover. For a few moments the hunter stood still, breath-quickening tail swaying for balance. Its nostrils flared, trying to relocate the fleeing scent trail amid the confusion of others, the musk of reptiles, the sweetness of decaying plants, the mineral tang of drying mud. But the trail was gone. Only the rhythmic thump-thump of headbutting resumed faintly in the distance as the Homalocephali band rejoined and reasserted order after chaos. Tarbosaurus exhaled softly, a hiss, almost lost in the night. Failure was not fatal. Hunger could wait. It crouched again, settling into the shadow of a fallen log, feathers puffing against the cool air, its head tilted toward the horizon, where lightning flickered far off over the dead floodplain. Rain might come tomorrow, and with it easier prey near the puddled banks. For now, stillness was survival. In the hush that followed, the Namek returned to equilibrium. Crickets resumed their song. Frogs croaked from the last shallow pools. A pterosaur glided overhead, its wings a ghostly reflection of the stars. The small predator closed its eyes, letting its heartbeat slow until it matched the rhythm of the night. In that moment it was neither failure nor victor, neither threat nor threatened, only another fragment of a living system suspended between scarcity and abundance. In the morning the sun would erase every footprint, every trace of the chase. But for now, under the watch of the moon, the story of hunter and hunted played out once more, an ancient duet of motion and silence, repeated for millions of years across a land that never truly slept. Sky lords of the carrion fields, Before the rains returned, before even the wind remembered how to move, the Nemegt sky belonged to giants. They ruled not from the clouds, but from the stillness between them, gliding effortlessly, their wings tracing arcs wider than houses. These were the Azharkids, the Skylords of the late Cretaceous masters of air, scavengers of death and messengers of balance in a world forever teetering between feast and famine. The scene begins in silence beneath a shrunken sun. On the cracked plain lies the carcass of a Mongosaurus, a sauropod felled weeks ago by thirst or age. Its massive body half sunk into the clay has become a shrine of sustenance. Around it the earth glistens darkly with drying fluids, and a haze of insects forms a vibrating halo above the remains. Then from the horizon they come shapes that seem too large to belong to life. One, then two, then five vast wingspans descend in slow spirals, their shadows sweeping across the basin like the sails of some forgotten fleet. When their feet touch ground, the illusion of flight ends, replaced by something stranger. A stilt-leg gait, deliberate and alien. The largest, with a wingspan over 10 meters, walks with the poise of a stalking heron, neck arched high, skull heavy and elongated like a spear. Smaller kin follow their proportions, echoing the same design in miniature, a family of skyscrapers rendered in bone and tendon. Though they once ruled the skies, Azharkids were just as formidable on land. Their long limbs and folded wings transformed into four-legged striders, each step cushioned by shock-absorbing joints. They moved with a quiet authority, their movements bird-like, yet something older, each stride a balance between grace and menace. Where most creatures scavenged in haste, these pterosaurs fed with precision. Their toothless beaks, sharp, hollow, and reinforced, probed the carcass with surgical delicacy. One jabbed into a tear in the sauropod's flesh, pulling free a strip of half-dried muscle. Another dipped its long bill into the skull cavity, extracting morsels of soft tissue unreachable to smaller scavengers. Their feeding looked almost ritualistic, slow, methodical, efficient. In a landscape of chaos, they imposed order upon decay. The Skylords were not loyal to death itself, but to what it made possible. Their flight carried nutrients farther than rivers ever could. Every takeoff from a carcass meant a redistribution of the dead bone dust, spores, parasites, and seeds lifted into the wind. The Nemegt's fertility depended as much on these creatures as on any living grazer. They were the couriers of renewal, transforming death into movement. Above the feeding ground, smaller pterosaurs circled wary but patient. Some species no larger than a pelican waited their turn, content to scavenge the scraps left behind. Others, bolder or hungrier, landed too close and the giants punished their intrusion. A hiss, a downward thrust of a beak, a spread of wings that cast a shadow like an eclipse, and the smaller flyers retreated, tumbling back into the thermals that would carry them elsewhere. The physics of their existence was its own miracle. To sustain such vast wings, Azharkids relied on thermals rising from the baking earth. With minimal effort, they could soar for hours, perhaps days, drifting over dozens of kilometers in search of scent, or shimmer an airborne patrol that stitched together ecosystems. Every carcass they found became a nexus of life and decomposition. Beetles, worms, scavengers, and microbes following where the giants led. Their wings, when spread, turned sunlight into silence. The membrane, stretched taut between elongated fingers, shimmered, faintly as they moved, each beat slow and economical. Energy was sacred in this world, waste meant death. So they learned to read the wind like scripture, gliding where others flapped, climbing on columns of invisible heat, drifting between air currents as if between worlds. On the ground, they were almost statuesque creatures of geometry and patience. Their heads tilted with measured curiosity, their crests glowing faintly where the light caught them. Some paleontologists believe these crests were not merely for display, but for stabilization in flight, acting like rudders in the open air. But on the ground among the dead, those same shapes became crowns, emblems of quiet dominion over what remained. Occasionally, the feeding drew the attention of other scavengers. A juvenile Tarbosaurus approached from the ridge, cautious but hungry. The Azharkids did not flee. Instead, the largest spread its wings, rising to full height, nearly 5 meters tall. The movement was slow, confident, and absolute. The young predator hesitated, sensing that this was not prey but something older, something that obeyed no rules but its own. The Tarbosaurus turned away, disappearing into the haze. The pterosaur folded its wings again, unbothered, and returned to its meal. When at last the heat began to fade and the wind rose again, the Skylords prepared to depart. One by one they spread their wings, letting the thermals lift them gently upward. Within seconds, the ground-bound fortress became a fleet of moving shadows gliding silently toward the horizon. Beneath them, insects swarmed over the half-cleaned bones, completing the work they had begun. By morning, the carcass would be nothing but architecture ribs, arching over the plain like the ruins of a cathedral. The pterosaurs would be gone, their silhouettes already lost in the brightness of a new day. But in their wake, they left a trace that even time could not erase, a trail of redistributed life, a pattern of nutrient rebirth written across the sky. For as long as there was death in the Nemegit, there would be wings above it, ancient, solemn and unhurried. And in their unending flight, they carried not just the story of scavengers, but the truth of the earth itself, that everything that rises must one day return and everything that falls will one day fly again. When giants arrive, the Skylords depart, and for a while silence reigns over the plain. But silence in the Nemegit never lasts. From the far edge of the basin, the ground begins to tremble, a dull, rhythmic cadence that builds with each heartbeat. A shadow slides across the bones of the fallen sauropods, stretching longer, heavier, till it resolves into something both majestic and terrible. The giants have come. Two Tarbosaurus Batar apex predators of the late Cretaceous emerge from the heat haze. They are siblings, perhaps rivals, perhaps partners, each scarred by a lifetime of violence. 35 feet from snout to tail, with jaws built for bone and muscle, they are empires in motion. Dust curls around their legs as they approach the carcass once claimed by the Ajdar kids. Dominance among giants is rarely quiet. The larger one, her ribs faintly visible beneath sun-toughened skin, lowers her head and releases a low growl, deep enough to ripple the surface of the nearby mud. The other hesitates, circling wide, head bowed but eyes locked. These displays are ancient theatre posture, as language sound as law. The rules are simple but merciless. One eats first, the other waits or bleeds. The larger female steps forward, jaws parting in a show of authority through exhaustion. Her teeth, some cracked from past kills, glint like ivory daggers dulled by overuse. She does not need to fight. Her history fights for her, the limp in her stride, the missing tooth, the half-healed bite marks on her flank. The younger Tarbosaurus yields, exhaling a long hiss that could be submission or disgust, but dominance does not equal abundance. Even for kings and queens of flesh, the world's generosity is finite. The female begins to feed, tearing into the sauropod's ribs with methodical brutality. Each bite strips not only meat, but memory, the last fragments of life recycled into another's endurance. Her skull flexes with each pull, muscle cords ripple under scarred hide. Around her flies swarm in black clouds, a halo of decay that stings her eyes. She feeds, but hunger never ends. It only shifts shape. The second Tarbosaurus waits, pacing in a slow arc. Every few steps he lowers his snout toward the dust, tasting the air. His hunger is chemical, not moral. He smells not just food, but pathogens, the invisible kingdom of bacteria and parasites blooming inside the carcass. For scavengers, this large disease was a constant shadow. A single bite from a tainted kill could mean fever rot or death, yet to starve was slower. Evolution had wired them to gamble every meal. They were not immune, merely adapted, acids in their saliva strong enough to dissolve infection stomach enzymes burning like acid rain. Still, infection was the quiet equalizer. A single wound left untreated could fester under the armor of power. The fossil record preserves such stories: punctured jaws, abscessed bones, fused vertebrae that tell of pain endured for months. Power in the Mesozoic was not immortality. It was a temporary illusion bought in blood and bacteria. As she feeds, the matriarch pauses, her head lifts, nostrils flaring. The scent of another Tarbosaurus, old male, distant. Her tail stiffens. The second hunter freezes eyes, flicking to her, awaiting the decision. The air between them tightens like a drawn bowstring. They both know what happens when too many giants find the same prize. The pecking order of hunger becomes a hierarchy of wounds. In mega carcasses like this one, cooperation is an accident, not a strategy. Even within the same species, each meal becomes a negotiation of distance: 6 meters tolerated, 4 resented, 2 fatal. The stronger eats, the weaker waits, and the bones bear witness. The matriarch rumbles deep in her throat. The sound is not a threat, but a warning to herself as much as to others. She steps back from the carcass flanks, heaving her tongue, flicking against cracked teeth. The younger one moves in cautiously, snapping at the last strings of flesh before the elder reclaims her ground. They circle each other in uneasy rhythm, predators orbiting scarcity. Overhead carrion birds and smaller pterosaurs return, spiraling, above like opportunists at a court of kings. Every motion below has consequence: a kick of dust, a snapped tendon, a blood drop flung skyward. Each fragment will become food for something smaller. In this way, the giants feed not only themselves but the entire chain of survival. Still, even in dominance, there is fatigue. After hours of feeding and guarding, the matriarch retreats a few steps into the shadow of a petrified log. Her eyes half close, her breath slow. Around her neck, scar tissue puckers where an old wound once festered. The young male lies beside the carcass, not sleeping but conserving muscles twitching, breath shallow. The carcass will last them only a few more days. After that, the cycle resumes: hunger, search, risk, victory, infection, rest. And beneath it all, the planet itself remains indifferent. The drought still burns, the wind still scrapes. The bones they fight over will one day fossilize beside their own. In the Nemeget, power was never permanence. The Tarbosaurus ruled the carcass, but not the hunger that summoned them here. Even the mightiest predators lived on borrowed flesh, their empires dissolving meal by meal. As the sun sets, the two giants stand side by side, their shadows crossing over the bones of the fallen. For a fleeting moment, they seem eternal monuments of muscle and will. But in the silence that follows, the truth becomes clear: no creature, however strong, ever truly wins against emptiness. Only those who keep walking, keep hungering, keep enduring, live to see the next dawn. The herd passes Nemegtosaurus. By late afternoon, the air over the floodplain had begun to shimmer again, the heat returning to erase the night's fragile cool. Around the carcass where the Tarbosaurus pair lingered, the wind carried a sound too deep to be called noise. It was vibration first, then rhythm, then presence, a pulse of ground-born thunder, rolling from far across the basin. The giants of death looked up from their feast jaws slick with blood. The tremor was unmistakable. They had felt it before the arrival of those whose size dwarfed even their own. Across the horizon, through veils of dust and heat haze, emerged a procession that seemed more geological than biological. Dozens of Nemegtosaurus, massive long-necked titans, cousins to the great diplodocids of earlier ages, moved in solemn formation across the barren flats. Their bodies, slate grey under the sun, shone with a faint sheen of dust. Each one stretched nearly 40 feet from nose to tail, their necks arched high like cranes, and their tails swept low tracing arcs in the sand. From a distance, it looked like a river of motion, slow, steady, inevitable. The herd advanced not as a crowd, but as choreography. Herd spacing was their first defense, each individual keeping a measured distance from the next, just far enough that a predator could not wound more than one at a time, yet close enough that no calf strayed alone. The smallest members, newly hatched juveniles no larger than horses, walked in the heart of the column, shielded by adults whose sheer bulk formed a living wall. On the periphery, subadults served as sentinels, their heads swinging constantly, from side to side, watching for movement among the dunes. The lead female, recognizable by her deep chest scars and broken tail tip, lifted her neck and tasted the air. Even at this distance, the Tarbosaurus scent was unmistakable. But hunger was not reason enough for battle. The carcass was claimed, and her herd carried its own world of muscle and momentum. She veered slightly, redirecting the column in a broad curve around the scene. As they drew closer, the air filled with the sound of breathing on an architectural scale, a soft chorus of exhalations, the hiss of air moving through lungs the size of barrels. The Tarbosaurus female rose from her rest posture, rigid head low, ready to defend. The younger male circled behind her tail, lashing. For a moment, predator and prey shared the same horizon and the same silence. This was not a meeting of equals, but of necessities. The Nemegtosaurus herd could not be hunted by strength alone. Even full-grown Tarbosaurus, tenacious, lethal masters of strategy, chose their attacks wisely. Fossilized bite marks on sauropod ribs and hadrosaur tailbones tell of attempts that failed as often as they succeeded, teeth dragged across flesh but failing to penetrate muscle thickened by centuries of selection. For every successful kill, there were 10 pursuits abandoned in exhaustion or crushed beneath a retaliatory swing of a tail. And what tails they were, whips of bone and sinew, each capable of breaking a predator's ribs or shattering its jaw. In the dust that now swirled between them, both species paused in the unspoken truce of shared fatigue. The Tarbosaurus lowered her head once more, returning to her meal, pretending disinterest. The herd continued its march, feet thudding softly, eyes glancing but not lingering. In passing, their sheer mass changed the landscape. Each step pressed the earth deeper, compacting sediment that would one day harden into stone. Their movement carried seeds, spores, and nutrients from one valley to another. In the grand calculus of the Nemegt, even migration was creation, a slow-motion form of ecosystem engineering. The trees they grazed would regrow stronger, the water holes they emptied would refill with rain. As the herd flowed around the carcass, the juveniles craned their small necks, curiosity overriding fear. One paused to sniff the air, nostrils flaring at the iron scent of blood. Its mother rumbled a low warning, and the young one pressed close again, shadowed by the wall of her body. They passed within 100 meters of the Tarbosaurus, but neither side moved. Each species understood the other's mathematics. The risk was not worth the reward. Above them, Ajdarkid pterosaurs still circled in slow, lazy arcs, watching this wordless negotiation play out a tableau of balance amid brutality. In that brief alignment of hunger and caution, life had found a momentary equilibrium. Then, just as quietly as they had arrived, the sauropods were gone, melting into the heat shimmer, their silhouettes fading into mirage. Only the distant rhythm of their steps lingered like the fading beat of an ancient drum. When the dust settled, the Tarbosaurus female returned to her carcass. Around her, the ground still trembled faintly from the herd's passing, a reminder that even apex predators ruled only at the edges of greater powers. She lowered her head, closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to the echo beneath her feet. The Nemegtosaurus herd would leave tracks that stretched for kilometers, fossil corridors through time. Millions of years later, scientists would follow those trails and find in them not just evidence of life, but of restraint proof that even in an age of monsters, wisdom sometimes meant walking away. In the Nemeg, not every story ends in violence. Sometimes the greatest battles are the ones that never happen. Seasons of plenty. Seasons of fear. In the Nemeg, time did not pass in years, but in cycles, the long inhale and exhale of water. Every creature, every seed, every bone knew this rhythm. When the rains came, life bloomed in a fever of abundance. When they stopped, the same world became a crucible. The seasons here were not a calendar, they were fate. During the wet months, the floodplains drowned in green. Rivers split and braided until the land became a living mirror glittering under the tropical sun. Shallow pools teemed with fish and amphibians. Turtles laid eggs in the moist sand. Dragonflies the size of sparrows patrolled the reeds. Hadrosaurs like Sauropods gathered by the thousands along the rising banks, their calls echoing like brass instruments across the water. For a brief moment each year, the Nemeg was generous. Shoots of new vegetation reached knee-high overnight, fed by nutrient-rich silt. Dinosaurus, the great omnivore, waded knee-deep in the flooded deltas, its long arms sweeping vegetation into its bill like a living rake. Juvenile Therizinosaurus followed in its wake, plucking at what it left behind. Even predators feasted carrion was abundant, and the weakened victims of flood and fever made easy prey. Yet beneath that richness lay the inevitability of decline. As the water receded, the winners of the wet became the victims of the dry. When the floodplain shrank, their bounty evaporated. The same channels that had once fed the herds became traps, their clay floors littered with the bones of those who lingered too long. Herbivores adapted in different ways. Sauropods migrated toward higher ground, following evaporating streams. Tarkia stayed and dug, relying on memory and armor. Nemegtosaurus simply moved on its long legs, covering kilometers in search of greener corridors. Predators too had their seasons. Tarbosaurus thrived in the dry when weakened herds slowed and waterholes drew all life together. But floods tested even their supremacy. Mud clung to their feet, and the chaos of high water scattered prey too widely to hunt. For smaller carnivores like Adasaurus, the inverse was true. Drought exposed them to hunger, while floods replenished the amphibians and hatchlings they depended upon. The Nemegt was a roulette of resilience, spinning every year to choose its temporary kings. Modern science can still read those rhythms in stone. Isotopic analyses of fossilized teeth show alternating chemical bands, carbon and oxygen signatures, recording the shift between wet and dry. Like the rings of trees or the lines in shells, each stratum in a tooth tells a story of feast and famine, lighter isotopes from lush months of vegetation, heavier ones from parched seasons when only dry plants remained. To a paleontologist, these microscopic rings are the pulse of vanished years, a journal written in enamel. Bone histology tells the same story. Under the microscope, Tarkia's armor plates show growth lines that tighten during droughts, moments when even the fortress paused its expansion to conserve energy. In Sauropods femurs, seasonal interruptions form bands of slower growth, proof that plenty always gave way to privation. Even eggshell chemistry preserves this rhythm. Differences in oxygen isotopes between layers hint that nests were laid during the early floods timed perfectly, so hatchlings emerged into a world of food. If one could compress a Namecht year into minutes, the pattern would look familiar. Floods like heartbeat surges, droughts like exhaled pauses. Animals would migrate in waves, then vanish. Predators would rise, fall, and rise again. Grass, if it had existed, would have withered, regrown, and burned under the cycle of sun and storm. In this world, evolution was not about progress, it was memory of scarcity. Those who adapted didn't conquer, they adjusted. The ability to pivot between feast and famine mattered more than size, claws, or teeth. A dinosaur that grew fast in plenty but wasted energy and want left no descendants. But the cautious, the opportunistic, the ones who could eat anything, travel far or wait long, they became the architects of survival. Even today, the Namecht story repeats itself in the floodplains of the living world. The herds of the Okavango, the crocodiles of the Ganges, the migratory birds of Tonle Sap all live by the same pulse their ancestors once obeyed. When the rivers rise, they feast and breed. When the rivers fall, they retreat and endure. The continuity is astonishing. 70 million years may have passed, but the logic of water still governs life. For the creatures of the Namecht, every season was both promise and threat. The floods carved their bounty, the droughts refined their strength. The fossils they left behind, mud-rippled, iron-stained, layered like parchment, are the echo of that eternal rhythm. And so in the grand ledger of deep time, the Namecht remains less a battlefield than a score of survival, one where music is written not in sound but in sediment, not in melody but in adaptation. For every life that perished in the dry months, another found its chance in the wet. And for every victory of tooth or claw, the river waited patient, impartial, ready to erase, ready to begin again. What the desert still tells us, the desert today looks eternal, an endless skin of sand and stone dunes shifting like sleeping animals beneath the wind. But look closer, and you begin to see that the Gobi is not empty, it is layered. Beneath each ridge lies a memory, beneath each grain a ghost of water. The same sun that burns nomad camps by day once warmed the river forest of the Namecht. The same stars that watch over herders tonight once glimmered on the skin of Tarbosaurus as she stalked the floodplains 70 million years ago. At dawn, a scientist kneels near a low bluff. Her brush moves delicately across the surface of red clay. The wind picks up and the grains she uncovers catch the light like specks of gold. They are not gold. They are fragments of bone, fossilized, mineralized patient. Each stroke reveals another clue, a rib, a claw, tip, a tooth no larger than a fingernail. Around her the camp still sleeps except for the hum of a kettle and the distant sound of a camel's bell. The desert tells its stories slowly in languages of erosion and persistence. To find a single bone is to excavate a storm's worth of silence. Every discovery here is both revelation and reminder. Proof that life endures even where it seems impossible, and that time itself is a living system recycling worlds into dust and dust into understanding. The nomads who share this land know that patience better than anyone. They have lived with its moods, the wind that shifts directions without warning, the heat that gives way to frost in an hour. Their tents shaped like circles echo the geometry of adaptation. When paleontologists ask them for directions to fossil beds, they answer not with coordinates but with poetry, right until the wind changes. Under the same skies where Azhdarchids once soared, meteor showers streak across the horizon, burning brief and bright before dissolving into memory. To the untrained eye it is only beauty. To those who know the land's past, it feels like the universe replaying its own fossils, light preserved across time instead of bone. Scientists here record their findings in field notebooks, lines filled with sketches, isotope data, and half-legible excitement. Composite sediment layer, fluvial channel, reworked by wind. Tooth fragment, possibly Tarbosaurus. But between those notes are always the human moments, wind stronger today, sand whistling, like wings or stars brighter than the campfire. The dunes seem to breathe. Through their eyes, the Namecht is not dead, it is still in motion, speaking in traces. The floodplains are gone, but the record of their rhythm remains. Isotopes in bone whisper of rainy seasons. The direction of a fossilized ripple records the flow of a vanished stream. The dunes keep shifting, uncovering new bones each year, like time rethinking its own story. Each fossil here is a message written across eras. Together they say that adaptation is not dominance, but dialogue with change. That diversity is nature's greatest insurance policy. That strategy, not strength, decides survival when the world turns harsh. And that knowledge, no matter how certain, must bow to the humility of deep time. As the sun sinks behind the dunes, the light softens into amber. The scientist sets down her brush and listens. The wind moves across the sand, whistling through the hollows where rivers once ran. It sounds almost like breathing, almost like wings. Perhaps it is the same sound that once followed the Ajdar kids as they rose from the carcass fields, or the same whisper that passed over the backs of the Sauropods herds. Perhaps the desert still remembers. The last entry of the day reads simply "Wind over dunes, soft rising." The past isn't gone. It's just quieter now. Thanks for being here. Hit that subscribe button and join us for the next chapters full of history and discovery.